Welcome, everybody. And I am Beth Yerxa, and for those of y'all that don't know me or don't know Triangle Artworks, I'm going to just give you a brief introduction to Triangle Artworks and what we do. I'm executive director of Triangle Artworks, and we are a nonprofit, but what we do is we serve the arts community in the Triangle region as a business sector. And what that means is that we serve people working in the arts, either artists of all disciplines or nonprofits as businesses. So what we're doing is we're creating a center point for this arts sector, try to bring them together and give them increased power and presence. We're advocating for the arts as a business sector and making sure that the broader community understands that they are working artists and businesses, and that they should be paid for their work and their work should be valued. And then our day-to-day work is providing tools and resources and training that people working in this sector need to thrive. One example of that is ArtSwell, which is our new and regional professional development program where we provide all types of training programs and programs like this, where we provide information on sort of government programs and other information that helps your business. Today we're talking about unemployment, and everyone's very aware that COVID-19 has hit the arts sector very hard. There's lots of people out of work. Although some are starting to go back to work, there's a lot of people who may not go back to work for a while. And so the issues of unemployment are still very important to a lot of people, and the issues of what to do if I'm asked to go back to work and perhaps as my organization or my business is reopening and perhaps I have some issues and I'm concerned about going back to work. And those are the issues we're going to be discussing today. And I'm happy to have as our speakers today Bill Rowe and Clermont Ripley from the North Carolina Justice Center. Bill is General Counsel and Deputy Director at the North Carolina Justice Center, and Clermont is the senior staff attorney with the Workers' Rights Project at the Justice Center, and I can let them tell a little more about themselves and when we get started. But first I want to talk a little bit about logistics. As you all can tell, you're all muted and off screen. This is a true webinar, so you will not be able to actually ask questions live. However, a lot of y'all have asked questions in writing ahead of time. Bill and Clermont would be working to answer those questions in their presentation, but if they do not answer them, then we will be asking those questions first when they're done. And if you have additional questions, please look at the bottom of your screen, touch the screen, and where it says Q&A, please put the questions there in Q&A, and I'll be reading them out to Bill and Clermont after their presentations. I think that's it for sort of logistics, and Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, Beth and Corey, for helping us get set up here. I'll tell a little bit about the Justice Center. We're an advocacy think tank organization, a nonprofit here in Raleigh, but we have a statewide footprint and work on a host of strategies, including litigation. We go to the General Assembly and lobby. We have a research arm, litigation, and also engagement with community folks. And we try to tackle a host of issues related to poverty. And obviously, employment and workers' rights and benefits or unemployment insurance is one of those huge issues that's affecting people today. So we're going to talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about unemployment insurance. That's what's been going on, and hope I can answer questions. And Clermont's also going to talk about COVID-related rights for employees when I finish with my piece. And hopefully we can have a little discussion about what's going on in the state. And I'm not saying anything that isn't, people don't already know, and I've used this word too many times when I'm saying it again. There's unprecedented numbers of people out of work right now across the country, but also in North Carolina. And that's since the governor's executive order back on March 10th declared a state of emergency. And we
Bill, let me just interrupt real quick. You'd like me to start the presentation now, right?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, yes, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Can y'all see the screen that says unemployment insurance by the numbers?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you. And you all will have to bear with me. I didn't also say, besides my position at the Justice Center, I'm also a Luddite and don't have exactly the best technology skills in the world. So Clermont will be helping here quite a bit to move through the PowerPoint. But we are in this unprecedented time. To just give you a sense of the numbers, since March 15th to this week, we've had over 1 million people have filed claims for unemployment insurance benefits in North Carolina. There's never, ever been anything like this ever in the history of the country. This has gone on. At this point, about 685,000 claimants have been paid. And so obviously, if you do the math, there's over 300,000 people who haven't been paid. And what we don't have a good sense on for that 315,000 folks or so is how many are still waiting to get benefits and how many have been denied. And that's something we're trying to ascertain from the Division of Employment Security, because we do know a lot of people have been waiting for an awful long time, much longer than the 2 weeks that is claimed to be how long benefit claims ought to be processed. When good news is $3.6 billion in benefits have been paid out. And I've listed where that's come from. State unemployment insurance, those are folks who are drawing from the state unemployment insurance trust fund. I'll talk a little bit more about that. That's about $887 million. But the bulk has been from the pandemic unemployment compensation, which we'll go over in a minute. But that's been almost $2 billion, and that's federally funded. And then the pandemic unemployment assistance, which we'll also speak about, and that's what covers maybe a lot of people on this call who generally are not covered by unemployment insurance programs. That's paid out about $783 million. And then the pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, or PEUC, that's just gotten stood up and gotten operated, and that's paid out about $21 million. The next slide, Clermont. So unemployment, just a little background, it's a program from the Great Depression. It's been around since the 1930s. It's one of those cooperative programs between the federal government and state governments. Employers pay unemployment insurance taxes. The federal government collects that money, and there's a trust fund that's maintained in North Carolina to pay out benefits for folks. And the states have quite a bit of leeway and discretion about how they set their benefit levels. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well, because North Carolina has certainly some of the lowest benefits in the country. But the broad concept is if you're out of work through no fault of your own, you can get unemployment insurance. But you also need to be, in other times, you have to be working for an employer who pays unemployment insurance taxes. So if you're not covered. And that's why in this pandemic, the federal government has stepped in. So the governor issued an executive order 118 back in March that was very helpful in getting some more resources to come into the state to help with getting these benefits out. It also was helpful in making sure people could qualify for benefits. Usually there's a waiting week for getting benefits. That was waived by the governor. Often you have to be able and available to work, meaning you can't be sick or having to be staying at home and taking care of somebody. Obviously, in this crisis, that wouldn't have made any sense because so many people were at home because they were sick or they had a family member they had to be taken care of. They weren't able and available. There's usually a work search requirement. I think it's 3 jobs a week you have to be documenting that you're looking for. Again, that wouldn't have made any sense in this pandemic and this crisis because places were shut down. Unless it's an essential workplace, there was nowhere to go to look for work. And the last piece, for a benefit to employers, usually claims are charged to employers. If they lay people off, their taxes can go up if they lay off a lot of people. In this pandemic, since it wasn't under their control, these claims are not charged. So all the 1 million claims that have been filed, when they do get all paid, employers will not be charged against their taxes and will not see a tax increase. As I said, this allowed for some administrative support funding for the Division of Employment Security, but it wasn't nearly enough, nor did it come nearly in time to be able to do take care of the numbers that were coming in on people. And the Federal CARES Act, which is what I'm going to talk about next, was passed on March 27th. And that was a significant expansion by Congress to the unemployment insurance system across the country. Next slide. So there's three CARES Act. The CARES Act is the federal program that was passed that are being operated throughout the country. And the federal government or Congress recognized that there were states like North Carolina that if it was left just to their unemployment insurance system to provide help to people, that there'd be a lot of people left out and would not be able to be eligible, and the amounts of benefits and the length of time people would draw would be very limited. And so until July 31, workers can receive a $600 a week supplement under the pandemic unemployment compensation. And that's if we didn't have that, the maximum weekly benefit would have been about $350 from North Carolina's program. Major program is the pandemic unemployment assistance, and that is in operation until December 31. And that provides unemployment benefits to people who are just left out of regular unemployment insurance program. And as I was saying, you had to have a business or work for a business that was paying unemployment insurance taxes. And quite often, independent contractors or freelancers or other folks who are maybe not have a long work history, they would not qualify for unemployment insurance. And so this was an effort by Congress to cover lots of those people who are going to be left out. The $600 per week federal supplement is available to those folks. And the other tremendous benefit is that the maximum duration can run for 39 weeks. So people could draw if they're not back to work for 39 weeks. And that's through December 31 of this year. Third program is the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, or PEUC. And that again also runs to the end of this year and was just set up and started operating just a few weeks ago. And what this does is provide an additional 13 weeks of benefits for those workers who exhaust their state benefits. So these would not be the folks on the pandemic unemployment assistance, but this would have been folks who have been drawing unemployment before even the pandemic began and have exhausted their benefits. Why that was important is that North Carolina has a very short duration period for their state benefits, and it currently stands at 12 weeks. And so what this program does is when those folks exhaust those benefits, they can transition over to PEUC. It also is providing the $600 a week federal supplement. So if you qualify for any of these programs, the $600 a week is paid to you, and that's until July 31. Important point I want to make is that there's a weekly certification that has to be provided to DES each week in order to get benefits. And so it's really important to complete that and have that done, because if you don't, DES will not continue your benefits. So next slide. We'll talk a little bit about pandemic unemployment assistance. And this is one where under the federal rules, you first got to be denied regular unemployment insurance. And so many of you may have filed an application for unemployment, was denied, and then you're supposed to apply for PUA. We had hoped, and we think the state is doing this now, that we would try to combine those applications so that all the information would be taken on one. The state figures out that someone's an independent contractor or they weren't working for an employer paying unemployment insurance taxes, and they move them to determine if they're eligible for the pandemic unemployment assistance. There's a minimum benefit amount for PUA. The minimum benefit amount is 1/2 of the average weekly benefit in the state. Why that's important is one, that amount is about $133. The average weekly benefit is around $266 a week in North Carolina. But why is this important is sometimes it can take a while for DES to figure out the monetary eligibility by trying to get past wage stubs or income and other verifications, particularly for people who might have been working as independent contractors and not receiving regular paychecks. What the law says is that there's a minimum amount you're going to get, which is $133. So DES, once they figure out that the person is eligible for the pandemic unemployment assistance, can start paying them right away the $133, which isn't much of anything, but it also triggers the $600 supplement. And that ought to start fast, and that's what we've been advocating for, and hope that is happening. In the beginning, there was a lot of snafus on getting that going. So to be eligible for pandemic unemployment assistance, you really have to be out of work for a COVID-related reason. And I'm not going to go through all of these. I'll leave them up on the screen a little bit. But basically, it's something related to you either being diagnosed with COVID, having a household member who has a diagnosis, that you're having to care for someone that has it, a child is out of school because the schools are closed because of COVID. There's a quarantine been going on, or you're quarantined because of a healthcare provider. You've had to quit because of COVID, which may have been something to do with your health-related problems. And a lot of businesses are closed, obviously, because of the COVID pandemic. So next slide. So returning to work, and I know a lot of people may not be even thinking about returning to work, but a lot of folks, businesses are starting to open up now, and we're in another stage with the governor's executive orders. And this is going to become an issue for folks of trying to figure out, do they want to go back to work? And to be quite frank with you, it's an issue because some people may be earning more on unemployment insurance that they might going back to work. I will say that if you refuse to go back to work and you don't have a good reason, a good cause for doing so, your unemployment insurance will stop. And so the Division of Employment Security has adopted some pretty good standards for establishing good cause. And I've put a link in the PowerPoint, and I think everybody on here will get the PowerPoint, so you can go and look at it. But if you go to the website, you can find it as well. And the good cause is awfully closely related to the reasons why you wouldn't be going to work in the first place. So if you were diagnosed, or you have a household member who is still diagnosed with COVID that you're having to care for, you're at a high risk of severe illness from COVID, and have underlying medical conditions, and the doctor says you probably shouldn't be at work because of it, you could still be qualifying. Next slide. You're the primary caregiver of a child still, and that's closed because of the pandemic. There's a quarantine and you can't get to your workplace, or you've been advised by a healthcare provider to stay home. And the last one is one where I think it's going to be more difficult for people because you've really got to get your proof together. And this is where you believe there's a degree of risk going back to work because your employer has failed to comply with the safety guidelines that are set out by the CDC or by the governor's executive order, or any other authority that's out there right now. And that there may be a lot of people who just think it's unsafe to return to work, but in order to show that, you're going to have some evidence of that. And I think Clermont will talk a little bit about that, I think, but that's the one where I think a lot of people feel that there's not enough being done maybe in their workplaces to make it safe for them. And that's going to be an issue, I think, when people are called back to work. About deciding whether they're going to stay or not on unemployment or go back to work. So the next slide, please. So a couple dates to remember, and I've talked about them earlier, is July 31 and December 31. And after July 31, the federal supplement of $600 a week ends. And as I had said before, North Carolina has some of the lowest unemployment benefits in the country, and we would go back to a maximum benefit amount of $350 after July 31 if you're on benefits. And that includes people who are getting the pandemic unemployment assistance. So it would drop to $350. We also have a formula for calculating benefits that no other state in the country uses. That was adopted back in 2013 specifically to reduce our benefit amounts at that time. And so the average, like I was saying, is around $260, $270 a week is what people will draw. So there'll be a significant drop off in help after July 31, unless the Congress acts or unless our state legislature takes some action. Then at the end of the year, after December 31, the CARES Act unemployment programs all end, all of them go. So the PUA that was covering maybe many of the people on this call of independent contractors or business owners or folks who didn't qualify because of earnings, they are no longer eligible for unemployment benefits. There's nothing in our state law that provides any benefits for folks who are in that situation. Also, the federal duration, that was up to 39 weeks ends at that point as well. And we returned to North Carolina's duration, which is a sliding scale of 12 to 20 weeks, which is one of the lowest durations in the country at this point. Next slide. So I'm not going to spend a lot of detail here. There's a link in the web, in the presentation about how we could fix some of these problems. The obvious question, some of the problems that are going to occur after July 31 at the end of the year, and that exists before the pandemic for North Carolina's unemployment insurance program, but the benefits are too little. There's just not enough of them for folks, and they don't last long enough. They're just for too short of a period. And because we have such a short duration, that affects how many workers receive benefits, because we cut off a lot of folks before they get back to work. And so we have one of the lowest, what they call recipiency rates in the country before the pandemic. Somewhere around 8 or 9% of the unemployed received unemployment insurance benefits, which is just remarkable in how insignificant the reach of the program had been. And if we had had it in place without the federal CARES Act, well, I'm not so sure many people would be getting any help right now. So last slide. So here's a list for some additional resources on unemployment. The first one is a list of reforms that we think need to be taken. The second one is for legal help. I really encourage you, if you're having problems with DES, if you get denied, you should contact Legal Aid of North Carolina. You most likely qualify for them based on your income. They provide legal services. They are trying to really step up their game to represent people who are denied, because they know this is a critical need for people. So that is can be a huge help for people, and really encourage people to make use of it. And also we have a link to a fact sheet from our friends at the National Employment Law Project. That's a good overview of these provisions that I've done a short sort of brief coverage with you. And then our Budget and Tax Center has a forward-looking piece about what a sound unemployment insurance program ought to look like, and why that's so important. So at this point, I will stop and turn it over to my colleague, Clermont Ripley, who's going to talk about COVID-related rights for employees.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, as Bill said, I'm going to change gears here a little bit, and instead of focusing on what you can do if you're out of work, these have to do a little bit more with if you are working right now or you're going back to work, what rights and what options do you have? So the two questions I'm going to try to answer are, what can I do if I'm still working but need to take time off due to COVID-19? And what can I do if I don't think my workplace is safe? So looking at that first question, what if I need to take time off? Well, the good news is that you actually may be entitled to up to 2 weeks or 80 hours of paid time off. And some people will also be entitled to an additional 10 weeks or 12 weeks total of partially paid leave to care for a son or daughter whose childcare or place of care is unavailable due to coronavirus. And these are brand new rights. They're time limited rights. They are part of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which passed in March in Congress, I think the same week as the CARES Act that Bill mentioned. And this stuff is effective until the end of the year, just like the CARES Act. So on that, the first one, the paid leave I mentioned, you have to qualify. And these are the qualifying reasons for paid leave. You have to be unable to work or telework because of one of these reasons. And the first three I group as self-care reasons, and the last two as family care reasons. But they're similar to some of the qualifying reasons that Bill was discussing with the expanded unemployment. You've been, you can't work because you're under a stay-at-home order. That's the first one. You can't work because a healthcare provider has advised you to self-quarantine, or you are actually trying to go get a medical diagnosis and you need time off from work. In addition, there's these family care reasons that it's not you that's sick or has the issue, but you need to care for someone else who is under a quarantine or isolation order, or advice from a healthcare provider, or you're caring for a son or daughter, which is really broadly defined. It's not just biological son or daughter whose childcare or school is unavailable. The other big qualifying reason is you have to work for a public employer or a private employer with less than 500 employees. So that there are a whole lot of people who work for companies with more than 500 employees who are unfortunately excluded from this requirement. I think that was a political compromise in Congress, but for everyone who works somewhere with less than 500 employees, they should be entitled to this paid leave. A big thing to note, though, is that this is just for people who are employees. So people who are paid with a W-2, not a 1099. So all the freelancers and independent contractors and self-employed people that that we were talking about, and might include a lot of y'all who are eligible for the first time for some unemployment, you still are not included in this paid leave requirement because it's a requirement that the employer pay employees paid leave. There's also a small business exemption, but it only applies to that fifth item, the caring for son or daughter one. And that's if your employer has less than 25 employees and they can show certain things, they might be able to get out of this requirement. So what will you be paid if you're getting this paid leave? For those self-care reasons, the first three, if it's a personal reason that's qualifying you for the leave, you get up to $511 a day for those 80 hours or 2 weeks. If it's one of the last two items, the family care items, it's a reduced amount. It's 2/3 of your pay, up to $200 per day. But part-time employees are also entitled to this, and the hours are just different. Instead of 80 hours, you get whatever the average hours or the normal hours you work in a 2-week period. So maybe you work 20 hours a week, you would get 40 hours of this pay. A couple more notes on the paid sick leave. It's employees are entitled to use it immediately. You can't be required to use any other kind of paid leave or vacation that your employer offers first. You get to use this brand new federal government paid leave first. You also don't have to provide a doctor's note saying that you've been advised by a medical professional to self-quarantine or to isolate. But you might have to provide something in writing to your employer. Your employer, the employers get this money back through the tax system. So this is actually paid for by the federal government, but the employer has to document and show to the federal government that they gave employees leave for a qualifying reason. So they need to have some documentation to show, but it can just be a certification from the employee saying, this doctor, and you give their name, told me I need to quarantine for 14 days. And that should be sufficient. They shouldn't be asking you for a doctor's note. And doctor's notes are really hard to get right now since a lot of healthcare is being provided as telehealth. Another protection is the employer can't require the employee taking paid leave to find a replacement to fill in while they're gone. There's an anti-retaliation provision in there. So the employer can't take any adverse employment action against you. They can't give you an inferior job or a worse assignment, reduce your pay, anything like that. And as I already mentioned, employers are responsible for paying this, but they'll be reimbursed through their taxes. So the other type of paid leave I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation is this up to 12 weeks of paid time off if you need to care for a son or daughter. This is an expansion of an existing federal law called the Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, that many of you have probably heard of. Normally, FMLA gives you up to 12 weeks of job protected leave if you have a qualifying medical reason and it's to care for yourself or people defined as family members. The way this is different is it's actually paid leave. It's at that 2/3 rate again, up to 200 per day. But normally family medical leave is not paid. So that's an improvement. This is paid leave, but it's only for a really narrow qualifying reason, which is that you can't work because you are caring for a son or daughter whose child care provider is unavailable or their place of care is closed due to coronavirus. And as in the paid sick leave, the definition of son or daughter here is very broad. It's biological, adopted, foster, stepchild, a legal ward or child of person acting and intending to act as a parent. It's this Latin phrase in loco parentis. So it's pretty broad who your son or daughter is, but this is the only reason you can qualify for paid FMLA. Excuse me, I didn't mean to jump ahead. What job protected means is that when you get back from this leave, your job should still be there and you should be restored to that job. Your employer is allowed to hire someone else to do the job while you're gone, but they're supposed to restore you to that same pay and benefits and at least a similar job. To be eligible for this, you have to have worked for the employer for 30 days. The paid sick leave that I was talking about earlier, the 2 weeks or 80 hours, there's no requirement that you've worked for the employer for even 1 day. So it could be that you were hired, this is the first day you're showing up for work or supposed to show up for work, and all of a sudden you have a qualifying reason, you're eligible. But under the family medical leave, this 12-week job protected paid leave, you actually have to have worked for the employer for 30 days. The 500 employee cap applies here too. So if you work for an employer with more than 500 employees, they do not have to provide you this paid FMLA. And there again are some exemptions related to small businesses, especially in the healthcare industry. Couple other notes is while you are on paid FMLA, your employer has to continue paying your health insurance if they were doing that already. And like the paid sick leave, this costs the employer nothing. It's reimbursed by the federal government. So what if your employer refuses to provide you paid time off? If you think you are entitled to paid time off and your employer refused it, or if they retaliated against you in any way, you should contact either the U.S. Department of Labor and make a complaint. They are responsible for enforcing these new laws, or contact a lawyer. This is going to be enforced, or it is being enforced, similar to how the minimum wage and overtime laws are enforced. So if you unfortunately are in this position of being entitled to it and it was not provided, you should be able to recover the pay that you're entitled to through a lawsuit and possibly get additional damages called liquidated damages. And the employer should pay your attorney's fees. So you may be able to find a lawyer who will help you on what's called a contingency fee basis, because they can get the attorney's fees paid if they're successful by the employer at the end of the case. And if you're in that situation, we would be happy to evaluate your case and help find you a referral. So the other question I wanted to address is, what can I do if I think my workplace is unsafe? As many of you might know, the Center for Disease Control, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services have all put out different sets of guidance, mostly overlapping guidance, about what employers can do and what employees can do or should do to protect themselves at work and to protect their coworkers from the spread of coronavirus. Unfortunately, for the most part, that is just guidance, and it is not legally enforceable. You don't, in most workplaces, you don't have a right to 6 feet of physical distance while you are working, where if it's not provided, you can say, hey, this is my legal right, you have to give it to me. It's just guidance. We are pushing, and across the country, advocates are pushing to strengthen those requirements and make them something legally enforceable, but it is for the most part just guidance. But you can still do a couple things. The first is you can tell your employer what you think isn't safe, and you can complain about that to the employer and ask them to make the change. We recommend that you do that with at least one other person, because when it's 2 workers complaining together, that's called collective action or concerted action, and it triggers protections under a federal law called the National Labor Relations Act, which protects organizing and union activity, but it also protects just workers engaging in advocacy on behalf of themselves in groups. Also, if you're eligible for paid leave that I just talked about, tell your employer you want that paid leave. If you can get paid to stay home and avoid going to your unsafe workplace, I think that's a pretty good option. If you aren't eligible for the paid leave under the FFCRA, tell your employer you're not quitting and you will return when the workplace is safe. I can't guarantee that you're going to get any benefits there, but it's possible that if you do that, you will still have a job when you return, and it's possible you might be able to get unemployment under those circumstances based on that, the good guidance that Bill was covering from the Division of Employment Security, suggesting that if that you would have good cause for refusing to work. And if you are fired, go ahead and file for unemployment. There's a lot more unemployment available now, and you may be eligible. The other thing you can always do is file a complaint with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. I said that there's no legally enforceable right to the 6-foot thing, but there is a general duty clause, and every employee has the right to a safe and healthy workplace. It's just not a very clear or I don't think anyone in North Carolina, I don't think North Carolina OSHA is going to say that means you get 6 feet of physical distance. But filing an OSHA complaint may get them to go and investigate, may put pressure on your employer to improve things, and it will open up additional remedies to you. You can file a complaint confidentially, and if you are retaliated against by your employer for filing a complaint like that, you have additional protections. Just gonna look at my notes and make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. Last slide I have is just a couple additional resources. The first few are things that we've created that are on our website. One, it goes over these general rights, the paid leave, paid family medical leave, and it also covers the unemployment stuff that Bill talked about. And then we have another one that's specifically about your options if you are being asked to return to work and how to stay safe. The second thing I have here is from the National Employment Law Project, who Bill mentioned earlier. They have a whole section on their website that is resources and frequently asked questions for unemployed and frontline workers. I think it goes beyond frontline workers now, again, because economies are opening up and people are going back to work. So it's really just for unemployed and employed workers at this point. And then again, on our website, we have this UI and paid leave flow chart that helps you see how these programs that Bill and I have been talking about interact. Like, which one should you be applying for? Which one are you eligible for? There's one other resource I forgot to link to on here that I wanted to mention, and it is, there is a, There's an advocacy organization called Work-Life Law that is at the University of California, Hastings. And they have created all of these sample letters that you can use. They're form letters where you just fill in your name and the other crucial information so that you can request the paid sick leave or the paid family medical leave that I was covering, or even just request time off that is not necessarily something you're entitled to under one of those laws. So I can send that link to Beth and Corey to get it included. But if you Google Work-Life Law COVID resources, you should be able to find them. And I think those are helpful. And we hopefully will have something like that we've created that we link to our website in the future. And there's my email address if you have any follow-up questions for me that don't get answered today. You're muted.
Unmute first. Sorry. If you want to stop sharing your screen, and we will go to questions. And I can see some are coming up, and I'm going to start with the ones that have already been submitted first. And I'm probably not going to read all of these specifically because some of them go into detail, but there's some areas or questions that I'm going to talk about together. One is just sort of the surprise by some people that that 1099, workers are able to access it and this whole program, and just sort of how to, just the general questions are, where do I start? And I think Bill when we send the slides out, I know Bill did a good job of sort of talking about how the federal government came in and started the PUA and the other programs to supplement the North Carolina state unemployment benefits, to address the real issues that everyone was seeing with COVID. And on the issue of where to start, on the slides, I think that Bill and Clermont have both given some great links on like flow charts and things that help. I will also say, if you go on our website, triangleartworks.org, look in the upper right-hand corner, we have a COVID-19 resources page. And on there, we separate out each of the relief programs, and under the unemployment one, we have the link to the DES site. And I will say, and hopefully Bill and Clermont will agree, but with everything that DES did wrong in this this whole mess, they've done some very nice guidance documents that are really easy to understand. Really, they've done some flow charts. They've done some, they're basically start here, go here, then do this. And we have linked to the ones we think are most helpful on our site. And so you go there and it can help you sort of walk through how to start the process. A number of the questions we have, well, first I will say that some of the questions are about just the frustration with the process, and trying to get through, and applying and not hearing. What are y'all hearing from DES about whether or not people are getting their questions answered, whether there's still hours and hours of wait on the phone? How do people find out where their application is in the process?
I'd like to say it's getting better, and I think folks on the call and who are dealing with it will be the best judge of that. What had to happen is that DES went from a staff of 500 folks before the pandemic to now, I think, nearly 3,000 employees. And I think where the breakdown has been is that those 2,500 additional employees weren't necessarily trained as well as they ought to be, because I'm hearing more and more that when you do reach someone, they don't know how to answer the question. And so we have been talking to DES, and they have been doing better. They have changed their management. The governor replaced who was the deputy secretary over DES with another person, that they have to have a better just decision tree of getting things done for folks. They have put up a chat site on the website that I've heard from folks is maybe the best way to try to reach somebody. If you reach somebody, you can answer your questions. So that's developing as they get people trained. I think the more folks they have, the calls are going down as what we've been advised, because more and more people are getting paid. So I'd like to say that it's getting better. What worries us is that 300,000 plus folks who either have been denied or their claims are pending. And DES says they have prioritized by date of application to get those resolved in some way as fast as possible. So I'm actually having a meeting after this one with some other legal aid lawyers to talk more about what DES is doing, and we're trying to be in communication with them. But I think if you all have, you've just got to keep after DES, but if you have real big troubles and you're really frustrated, I encourage you to write to your state legislator. They're hearing about this and they are intervening and stepping in with the agency. And so I think the more they hear and sometimes they'll actually intervene on behalf of folks. So I think that's really important. If you get turned down, it's really important to appeal and not just say, oh, that's it. Because I think appealing and then contacting legal aid may be a way to try to protect your rights to see whether or not you get benefits. So a word is, yeah. Go
Bill,
ahead.
did you suggest that they also contact their state representatives if they think the benefit amount is too low and the duration is too short?
Yes, and I'll be honest with you, well, they ought to contact them about that, but we've had some cases where the people weren't getting the $600 supplement, which doesn't make any sense, because if you get $1 of unemployment insurance benefits, the supplement's supposed to be paid. So somewhere there's a breakdown just now. It could be another webinar we have about fixing the unemployment insurance system, because I think there's a lot of advocacy to be done there. And when this CARES Act program goes away, we're back to the system we've had in place, which is pretty miserly in the amount of benefits it provides folks.
Sorry, I'm muted again. So given the community that we serve, as you all recognize, there are a lot of people who are doing gig work, who they might be teaching, and then they might be selling their art, and they might be just selling their art at shows. They might be doing multiple things with income coming in various ways. And we have a couple questions about how that either the applications were declined based on minimum, not being able to establish a basis of income, and question about what they can do to overcome that, or just how to what if the amount they're giving us is too small. Any things y'all are hearing, any recommendations on how to prove your income and what to do if you're denied because your income is reportedly too small?
Well, I think for proving your income, whatever you can gather to show either contracts or check deposits or statements about what you were paid, you need to gather them and get them to DES. Our view for the pandemic unemployment assistance is that should not hold up your claim if you can show you've been working. So what they really are trying to find out is they want to pay benefits to someone whose work has been interrupted because of the pandemic, and you need to show that in some way to them. Then trying to figure out the benefit calculation can be complicated because you just don't have a W-2 and you don't have your employer giving you reporting wages. But for PUA, they should pay you the minimum amount, which is about $133 plus the $600 supplement, while they figure out what your amount of regular unemployment benefits would have been of that calculation. So it's anything and everything you can come up with to show who you were working with, for, and who were paid by, and what those amounts were is all what you need to put together, because it won't be like a regular where I just can pull my pay stub or I have a W-2. For people working on their own, they're going to have to come up with whatever evidence they've got that they've been working and that they've been paid.
Right. The person who, one of the questions was they apparently had a grant that was canceled and things, or at least furloughed. I mean, that's what I'm hearing is sort of everything you have to prove, every email you have to say, we were going to pay you, but now we're not. you send them. And from what I have heard from talking to some people at DES is that they want to see everything. They understand it's unconventional. And they also know that a lot of these workers, as Bill said, are new or they've never had to deal with gig workers before. And so they are, when you ask them what to send, they may not have that many suggestions for you. So what you need to do is just send them everything that you conceivably could think of to prove that what money you did make. One thing I also want to clarify is a lot of people, they're saying that they applied for unemployment and they were denied, and want to go back to the point you made about that being the first step to PUA. So just make sure that just because you're denied in the North Carolina program does not mean you cannot then apply to PUA.
Right. You should be getting the PUA if you were denied unemployment insurance. Now, DES has told us in a response to our questions that anyone who applied for regular unemployment and was denied, they are looking at their claims to see if they're eligible for PUA and then sending them notice about that. So if there's anybody out there who applied, got denied, but then have gotten nothing more from DES, we would like to hear about that. I mean, if you, in my emails there, I would like to know those stories, because we're trying to fix that, because we want it to be more seamless, that you just go in and apply, and then the Division of Employment Security figures out which program you can plug into. And if you were denied one, they should be making sure that you may be eligible for the public pandemic unemployment assistance, and make sure that happens.
Okay. And a couple quick questions still from the ones that were submitted before. One is, someone says that they did some work way back in February, and they just got paid in March after they submitted. When they do this recertifications, do they have to report the money paid in March for work done in February? Does that count as working?
I would report everything. And my advice with DES, Bill Rowe may say, I don't think it will count against you, because that was for work back in February, but I would let them know that you were paid and what period of time it was payment for, and let them decide from there.
Another little bit of a complicated question is someone who does not live in North Carolina, but 2/3 of their income is in North Carolina, from work in North Carolina, and they are trying to decide which state to apply in and how that affects the federal. And they said that where can I find out from North Carolina before I apply how much I'll get in North Carolina, so I can decide which state to apply in, is sort of the question.
Yeah, my advice would be, you might want to apply in both states. I think there's a fair guess, unless they were working in Mississippi, Alabama, Florida,
I think
they're probably going to get more unemployment benefits in almost any other state in the country than you'll get from North Carolina. But sometimes when you're in two different states, you may want to apply in both and let them sort it out. They'll figure it out.
Okay, that makes sense. That's one thing I've heard from FEMA people, is that to tell everybody to apply for everything, the government will figure it out. Okay, we have a couple minutes for for some of the questions off the Q&A. Someone's asking about retroactivity. I laid off in March but didn't apply till May. Will the benefits be retroactive?
The answer is yes to that. Yes.
So someone said, I recently returned to part-time temporary work from home. I still made very little money, but because it was over the allotted amount of employment benefits, I did not receive the $600 from the government. Is that correct?
That is correct. And if that person wanted to contact me, I'd like to hear from them, because it's one of the bigger problems we're seeing right now, is that we have a very strict way of determining eligibility. And if you make more than 120% over your weekly benefit amount, which is pretty low in North Carolina, you're ineligible for anything. So yes, and we'd like to get the legislature to address that.
Especially like for craft artists who, they're trying to just get back up. And if you sell anything, then you're automatically don't get your money. Can you earn $200 for a one-time performance, still collect unemployment? I guess that's the same issue that you're just.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. But it will depend on your own circumstances and what your earnings have been and all. Yeah.
Right. Just clarifying that for both the PUA and PEUC, the $600 fellow supplement will end on July 31st, and it will only continue until December 31st for the PUA.
No, that the $600, all of $600 goes away July 31st.
Okay, for all programs.
For all programs. The thing that continues through the end of the year is the eligibility for people who generally aren't eligible for unemployment. So like the gig workers or the independent contractors, but they're going to get paid what the North Carolina system pays people.
Okay, someone's asking a rather long question. I won't read it all, but sort of a question about doesn't appear I'm getting the entire federal supplement. How do you figure out how they calculated your payment?
That's too complicated for me to figure out, to be honest with you. So I think the $600 is $600. So if you're not getting the full $600, I'm not quite sure what's happening. I know sometimes you may owe the IRS money and they may be deducting. I've heard that's happening. And so if you have any doubt about the amount you're getting, you might want to appeal that. And DES will have to figure it out and tell you if it's correct or not.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to go through and get things I haven't talked about yet, but that is a small event music venue. I'm wondering when claims that are non-charged to employers currently will move on to being charged to us. We are not legally allowed to be open yet, but we're trying to plan ahead. I guess this question for Clermont. Right?
Well, the non-charging piece is unemployment piece, and that will end at the end of December. That's a federal law that said that all of these benefits are non-charging, and that's to the end of the year. After that, if you're laying off people, they're going to be charged to. It'll go towards your experience rating. It's like an insurance program, and so I'm not exactly sure how that will fit, because if anybody who's on it now, that none of that's going to get charged even after December 31. But if people start getting laid off, if we have a flare up and people are out of work because of the pandemic and you're laying people off, unless federal government intervenes, those are generally chargeable to employers. And I think probably the General Assembly will act if that's starting to happen again, because they want to try and keep taxes lower on employers. And they're much more interested in that than trying to get the benefits up for the workers.
So another question about out of state. To someone who pays taxes in North Carolina, but does work all over the country, say, are you able to report your income from all your work inside and outside the state, or?
Well, I'm assuming that person may be an independent contractor, and so they would just apply in North Carolina and then show what earnings they have had all around the country. It wouldn't matter. They're here in it. The PUA really isn't like there's no trust fund in another state that would pay them. This is all getting paid out of federal dollars that they would be eligible for, not the state trust fund.
So as long as you're not double dipping in another state, as long as you're just applying once.
Right. That's right.
All right. It is a little bit after 11, but I have one more question because I think we need to go into it, which is what are the chances, predictions, on whether another version of the CARE Act will happen after July 31st and chances for an extension?
Well, I think there's a good one, just because there's so many people out of work right now, and all the smarter people than me, prognosticators, saying we're going to have high unemployment into next year and beyond. And so if you don't do anything, you're just leaving a lot of people in the lurch right now and need a help. And not to be crass, but it is an election year. And I often see our elected leaders be much more generous in an election year than other times.
Mm-hmm. And we've had, I will ask one more question because we've had a number of questions about it, but whether or not, and it goes back to the, you know, the gig workers and how to prove the amount. And the question sort of is whether or not whether there's a minimum amount you can make in order to get unemployment benefits.
Not under the PUA. There should not be a minimum that they're requiring. Now you've got to have some work you need to show. So if you only,
If someone got only like one W-2 from one place,
you may not be eligible. You may not be eligible unless you meet certain earnings requirements. I don't know those off the top of my head. My advice is always apply and see what happens. But there is a minimal earnings amount that a connection to the workforce that you would need.
I think we covered, you know, the bulk of the questions people are asking, not every individual question. But as I said before, if you go on our website, there's a COVID-19 resources page that you can click on, and we have lots of resources there, links to things that we think are the really good resources within the DES and some other programs. We also have links to people like SBTDC and some other programs. If you have a business and you're trying to decide what to do, where you can call them and they'll do counseling. Bill and Clermont have provided their links and been kind enough to give you their emails. And so you also have them as a resource, and the Justice Center and some other of the resources they provided. So it's now after 11. Bill and Clermont, thank you so much. As a lot of people know, we've been trying to get an unemployment webinar going for a while, and the need is huge in the arts community, and we really appreciate y'all helping us out with this, and for all the information you provided and your willingness to respond to people further. Does anybody have any last remarks? Or Clermont? Clermont's a little bitty.
Thank you. Just thank you for inviting us, and we hope this was helpful.
It's very helpful. Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll be getting some calls and emails and some hits on your website. So thank you all.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you. You too. Bye.